Hello, everybody. Welcome to episode 15, our last episode of Chasing Shadows, this podcast series that's been designed to supplement and support our Ecclesiastes sermon series here at the Austin Stone. I hope that you've enjoyed it and found it helpful. I'm your host, Ross Lester, joined as always by my co-host and good friend, Val Hamilton, and then joined again today by a repeat guest, Tyler David, our downtown congregation pastor.
Last one,
is
best
here
one.
to help us close this thing out. So, TD, welcome back.
Yeah, man.
Thanks for giving us the time again today. Thank you for all of your help in preparing and preaching and ministering through this book to our people. And I hope that it's been something that's been helpful in your context downtown. I've noticed some stuff just being downtown recently again, and just seeing, I think, a fresh move of God amongst college-age kids. Just amazing for me to see it. Tell us a little bit more about what you're seeing and what do you think God's doing in the midst of it?
Yeah, I think given the state of the church generally, the state of our church the last just couple of years are going through so many things. I really was wondering last fall, like, God, what are you up to? Because there was some, I don't know if it was obstacles, but there's definitely felt like we're on the precipice of something, but I can't quite put my finger on it in a way.
Yeah.
And what has been fascinating is in this last semester, there was a week at our congregation where I heard 4 different stories of people coming to Christ, and in ways that were a guy coming out to the foyer and just saying, "Hey, who do I talk to if I want to follow Jesus?" Yeah. And we're like, "Me, please. I would love to talk to you." Other guys who didn't want to come to an event at UT and wanted to go hang out with friends, and then we're like, let's just go check this thing out. And then that becomes the catalyst for conversations. And what you're seeing is, I guess, in the wake of so much turmoil and so much, like a vacuum of leadership in a way is what I feel. It's like no one is talking about the state of the church with any optimism or any sense of who are the leaders to move us forward in this new world.
Right.
And I'm watching these young 20-somethings want to step into that gap in a way. And what they needed, though, for young leaders, they always need champions to help them go, you can do it. You really can. And then I think what this Ecclesiastes series has done for a lot of people is start digging at the foundations. Because what young people do in a unique way, when you're in midlife, you're like, the foundations are what they are. Here I am. I mean, what else can I really do? I mean, me and Lauren were laughing about, I've been around college students a lot more this last year. And when you're talking to 30-somethings, 40-somethings with families, we're trying to navigate, how would I involve any more people in my life?
Yes,
I don't know how to include more people.
Yeah.
And talking to college students again in a on the ground sort of way has been a reminder of the questions you ask when you're 20, they're foundational. Yeah. They're like, why do I exist and what do I want to do?
That's right.
And they're hitting at the foundations, the same way kind of our culture is. It's hitting at the foundational claims of what is reality, what is truth, who decides, and they're prime because we're the only ones with a cohesive worldview from Jesus that can actually navigate all the different complexities. And so I'm seeing them step in where most of the church is a little bit nervous about the future or maybe hostile about the future in either direction. And I'm seeing, like we talked about that first episode, like the gospel is producing what it always does, is people who have tasted and seen that Jesus is good. They don't feel the obligation to fit categories, and you never want to when you're 22 years old. And they're starting to help other people come back to faith. I mean, just this last Sunday, we had a baptism class, and we had 35 people in the baptism class.
Awesome. Praise God.
And again, I can't quite put my finger on what it is, but there's something sort of brewing. Even I asked some of the college students about the election. I was like, hey, how was it in your group? And it just wasn't as tense for them. And I thought that was really encouraging because honestly, the 2 sermons that we preached on it, they were like, that was actually really helpful. And none of my friends really have those categories. So it was honest. They said, literally, I talked to him yesterday. He said, it's really settled me and helped me know how to think through it. And but none of their friends have categories other than big, broad sort of monolith sort of view of the world, and Christianity and the Bible particularly is always going to create this really nuanced, textured that is able to kind of navigate across differences. And I think that's what everyone wants, is how do I navigate across difference? And the Bible's doing that.
Well, and it does feel like seeing the younger generation have a hope and an optimism and a hunger and I want to engage and I'm excited to engage. And for some of them, it might have been the first time that they've engaged. For those of us who are 30, 40, having our young kids, you know, you were tired and exhausted and you kind of get set in with things aren't as they should be. And so I think in a lot of ways, it can be really life-giving to the church to see like, okay, look, the generation coming up is actually really animated by this. And like, we can kind of remind us, I used to be, I should probably rediscover some of that. Where'd they go?
But you know what's funny? Because I always feel like there's this tendency in older generations to placate younger and go, you're the most special generation ever. And no one's like you. And so I've almost been to a fault anti that. Like, I'm not telling you're great until, but it's been funny. Like even me coming in, not wanting to flatter them, but watching them take those steps and re-engage. And there's nothing like new people coming to Christ at great cost to themselves to make you kind of wake up to, man, we are a part of some really special, sacred things that are like mustard seeds. They grow real small and they're quiet and they're secret. And then all of a sudden they spring up. You're like, whoa. What has happened? And then you find out, they've been playing basketball together at Gregory for the last 6 months. And then when the sermon happened or the moment happened, it was going into fertile soil. So it always is a reminder for me, it always takes the whole church to do God's work. It's never one person or one preacher or we're all playing our little parts. And it's been amazing to go sit back and watch it.
That's been a big societal and generational shift, right? It used to be like, if you could just get someone to the hype worship service, right? That's where evangelism happens.
That's right.
I think what we're seeing now and pretty much everyone I've seen to come to Christ over the last few years has been relational evangelism again. And then the church gets to play this kind of supporting role. But someone's been sharing the gospel in the context of friendship over a long period of time.
Well, because the doctrines that we have seem more and more irrelevant or strange. And so I need to have a live, in some ways, an incarnate sort of experience of the words you're talking about. So you're talking about this love and doctrines that I don't really understand. I need a community of people to let me watch that flesh itself out, to go, that's what you mean by forgiveness. That's what you mean by love or purpose. And so what I was telling some of the students is your life does give some, like 1 John 4:12, like no one's seen God, but if we love one another, God abides in us. There's something about our love that gives some sort of flesh to God's love. And I'm seeing them playing their part. So when preachers like us get up and try to do our best, I always tell them, like, we're always partnering. Like, I want Sundays to be you are so proud to bring your friends here, but that all I'm doing is tilling up soil, but I'm actually not doing any of the cultivation work. That's all you. And so we're kind of going hand in hand. And again, I think there's a generation of people is if you get despondent enough, eventually you're like, something's got to give. And so I think that all the turmoil and kind of sadness of the last couple of years is birthing this sort of joy and fervency in some people that I just candidly didn't expect. And even the life of our church, what we've all been going through, I'm like, I just didn't see it. And now I'm sitting here going, wow, God was doing some deep pruning because he wanted to do some new works.
But it syncs powerfully as well with the total eroding of trust that people have in institutions and in leaders. Right? And so that's happened obviously through some public exposure and disqualification, which has been a pruning that God's been doing. But there's also been a generational shift to say we just don't trust institutions or prominent leaders in the way that we used to. But that can be a real opportunity for the church, right? Because instead of trying to pull people to a prominent leader, we're really trying to walk with them in the context of relationship.
Well, and I think it's that authenticity piece that sometimes you can look and you're like, how does that leader live in their other life where they're not on the stage? And I think there's a credibility when you both hear this compelling leader speak the truths of the gospel, but then you go and you get around the people of God and you see their life is actually matches their doctrine. It looks different, like they're bought into this to a degree. I think there's some persuasion and some the compelling nature of that really appeals.
And I think it's easy to bemoan how hard it can be to be a leader today, but I think the other opportunity is good. Let's make it so that way if you don't like the sort of having a life and doctrine that match and that kind of is annoying to you, that people would expect you to have that sort of. Don't be a leader. And what I think is it's an opportunity for the church to show we can produce the kinds of leaders who can navigate these things because God's producing a kind of character that you can't fabricate. But the difference is it'll take longer time. And that's what I don't think we're used to. Is we're used to we start a program and instantaneously it grows, or you call people up and leaders are ready right there. But now it's like, no, maybe that was actually flawed to begin with. And the quickness that we wanted to develop people was already the problem. And so now if we have a longer time frame, we may be more easily discouraged in a year or two time, but maybe in 5 to 10 years, we're going to have a lot more quality of leaders, both men and women, who can navigate these things. But it doesn't feel like I'm navigating anything because God's produced this in me. So I think that's part of it too, is part of what God was doing even in our church is making all of us who have been leaders to say, was I the kind of leader I wanted to be? And honestly, for me, it was, I think you can want to be a kind of person and have a hard time getting there. And I think Jesus will give you dreams to be someone you want to be, but you don't have the resources to get there. So you'll finally have to depend on him to get you to be that kind of person. And so what I see is, I'm like, there are things in me that I wanted to change 5 years ago that I was working as hard as I knew how to change. And Jesus is like, no, I'm going to produce it. Yeah. But it always requires getting brought low and getting broken to be the kind of beautiful thing you want to be in the future. And so that's what I'm looking back the last 5 years and going, man, what a tumultuous, difficult, painful, sorrowful. And I'm just, the way I've described it, just starting to see some saplings. It's like, this whole forest, in a sense, this field had been overgrown. And now it's like, I had to take all of it out, start fresh. And I think it is a really exciting time to be a leader in the church, because when there's a vacuum and there's problems, that should be us going, fresh ambition, right? Fresh, like the zeal, right? And nothing like a 21-year-old to be like, and we can do it. And you're like, I forgot. But you're right. We actually can do it.
As we record this, it's the day after Tyler's birthday, and he's entered into his 40th year. So,
I'm 39.
Well,
I know, but
you've started that 40th year. Maybe don't even. That's how it works.
That's
how math works, Tyler.
Don't check the state.
Fair enough.
History major. That's how you know.
Let me back up. Math is a concept of counting things. But I don't know what the age is, but there's clearly an age at which the metaphors all start to become agrarian. And
a lot of farming.
And so suddenly we're clearing fields and planting saplings. And I guess it's 39. I guess that's the thing. Before we just quickly try to summarize Ecclesiastes, which we do want to do, Tyler, would you have a word to people in our church across our 6 congregations who are a little older and who perhaps haven't been that encouraged by the generation coming after and aren't that excited about the future of the church in those hands? How do they pray? What do they do? How do they engage this next generation in a way that's helpful?
The thing that there's been a text from 1 Corinthians I've thought about a lot, is they have many spiritual guides, but not many mothers and fathers. Yeah. And I think if you really are concerned about the next generation and you genuinely think Jesus is the best answer to every problem and question, then I think the best thing to do would then go get in the actual grid of it and help, right? Yeah. But I think it's most of these young men and women, no one when they're young and has ambitions and dreams wants to be told how it's dumb to have them or they're not ready, right? But what they really need are mothers and fathers who will commit to them and mentor them, pray for them, support them, instruct them. I think a lot of the times when we feel really strongly but don't have the maturity of instruction, we only know how to make someone feel what we feel. Yes. But what I'm seeing is a lot of this generation of leaders, they just don't have a lot of instruction. Right. Yeah. So we were talking about this before, but there's been a lot of deformation where they actually don't know what they ought to aspire to. I was training some leaders and telling them about, most of you have not gone through relational conflict because you don't have a lot of relationships. Yeah. So when you have conflict in a relationship, you don't know that's normal. Right. You're supposed to have real two people trying to love each other. There's going to be conflict. Right. But if you are in a digital generation and you're lonely, you don't have many. So conflict feels impossible. Yeah. So I think it's how does the older generation go, we got to help everybody recapture sound, robust doctrine. I think that has been lost in a lot of this, is we've kind of lost, we'll get to Ecclesiastes, but basic biblical concepts have all but been lost. So I think it's praying again to believe, honestly, it's believing all the old promises we've kind of let go of. Yeah. The harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. Therefore pray earnestly to the Lord of the harvest. There is still a plentiful harvest, but it's going to look different than it looked the last maybe multiple generations in this context. And I do think it's a mother. It's probably out of the category of how could I be a spiritual mother or father to these people. And what's hard about doing that, though, like being a mom, being a parent to any kid, they always show you how you're not doing the things you're asking them to do. Right. Yeah. So you can't model something that you're not doing. Yeah. Right. And I think that's what this generation really needs is, like every generation, man, help me grow, help me change. But I don't know how to do relationships the way that you do because I haven't had a lot of them, but that shouldn't be the occasion for the gap to be shaming me.
Right.
The gap should be instruction and love, right?
Well, so I think in some of the conversations I've had just with a couple of the girls that I mentor, it's been really interesting because the generation behind you almost always is swinging against your generation in some way. In some way you did it. They're like, we see that wasn't good and now we're going to go this way. And what I have found to be really helpful is really learning like, oh, the things that I'm so quick to be dismissive or you're wrong or not like about how the shift might go the other direction. I'm like, when I sit and I listen, I'm like, oh, I see why. I see some of the pitfalls and shortcomings for my generation and how we've done it and why you would run this way. But let me caution you because as you clean out this bathwater, you don't want to lose this baby. This baby you actually need to take with you. And I do think that's something that you can do as that generation is kind of coming up behind you is both like cheer them on as they rightfully make some course corrections and yet at the same time help them not forget the things that they might need to take with them as they do that.
And that's where you have to build bridges instead of walls all the time. I think walls help you feel safe, but they don't bridge gaps. And so I think it's how do we find what we have in common? I think that's part of it too, is looking for commonalities instead of looking for difference. And that's why I like Paul's spirit in like Acts 17 of like, these are pagans who don't share any of his worldview. And he's looking for, what do we have in common?
That's right.
Okay, let's start there. And I think when you're older, it's easy to just feel the difference. And I think it's looking, where do you have commonality and building off of that. And I've been guilty of that as anybody, of like seeing disconnect, seeing distance, seeing the inability maybe to, I just met with someone who was having a hard time just saying they were having a good day. Because to say you're having a good day means I must be stuffing something. I'm like, no, you can just have a good day. Okay. It's totally fine, But I think in that generation, there's a sort of, well, I can't just have a good day. Something has to be wrong.
That's not authentic.
It's not authentic in a way. So, but instead of seeing that difference and just pushing it down is encouraging. Going, no, you had a good day. Praise God that He can give you days where you feel His love. And that be it. And you had a bad feeling, but that doesn't have to be your whole definition of your reality. So I think it's that, how do I build bridges with this next generation? Because there is a lot of potential, but it's going to feel and look a lot different. And that's, to your point, it always does. It always does.
Yeah. Good. Well, in our remaining time, let's quickly summarize some of our learnings from Ecclesiastes. We spent 4 months together in this great piece of ancient Hebrew wisdom literature that's really changed my life, become one of my favorite sections in all of Scripture. Let me ask you a couple of different categories, and we'll just answer these kind of briefly, but I'm interested to hear from both of you as you look back over the series. Your biggest wrestle or struggle with the text over this period, as we've taught it, as we've sat under it, as we've studied it together. First question would be, what would be your biggest wrestle or your biggest struggle with the text?
I think I'd probably start with and I think it might have to do with just the relevance of the election being when it fell. I know you guys, you picked Ecclesiastes, you probably saw these things, you're like, okay, we're going to hit this, and it's right around the time that we're all going to the ballot box. And it was such an exhausting season in particular for me of how long this campaign cycle was and how many crazy things happened in the midst of it. It was very disorienting and it was really hard. I feel like the rhetoric, there's just been so much that has been hard to know. What is my job? What is my role? How do I do this? And what feels like an important election, and the way we're talking about it felt like, is it the most important election of our lifetime? And it's the most important election of ever that will always be. And how do I wade into that as a Christian? And so I think the wrestle that I had was, okay, what Ecclesiastes said versus what it feels like out there. It seemed like such a contradiction. It flew in the face of when I turn on the news or I listen to my podcast or I have those conversations. Ecclesiastes gave us this opportunity for what you said, which was joy. And I was like, is that what I feel? I don't know that I feel it. And I had to really wrestle with the idea of like, I feel fear. I feel nervous and anxious. I feel all these things. Where is joy? And so that was for me kind of the biggest wrestle of like, I know it's true. I see it. I think there's opportunity for that. And I can actually have hope-filled joy that's unshakable. This election doesn't determine it. But I think that was for me one of those biggest things where I really had to confront what it felt like out in the world and what God said in His Word.
So like a collision between existential dread, right? And then a preacher who's going meaningless. It's vanity, right? It's temporary. And you're going like, it doesn't feel temporary. It feels existential.
But it's really worked up.
That's amazing. How about you, TD?
I think overall, it's kind of both an insight and it's not so much perplexing as it is insightful to what I think is true of the whole biblical arc and of my life is that following Jesus is not a simple one-to-one equation. Mm. And what I mean by that is life does not operate on a, actually not even life, the way God rules the world. Because I think it's easy to say life in general, but God rules the world in such a way and governs the world and runs our lives that it's not good plus good equals good, or bad plus bad equals bad.
Yeah.
And I think that is very perplexing because we really want to think if I follow Jesus and I'm faithful to him, then it will always be an if-then sort of equation.
That's right.
If I do this, then God does that.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think Ecclesiastes is showing us that even that one, life does not work that way, that often you can do good and receive bad, or do bad and receive good. Mm-hmm. And I think the way the Ecclesiastes even ends is similar to Sermon on the Mount, where Jesus is setting up a new sort of wisdom and heavenly reality of how to interpret the world, and God makes his grace shine on the evil and just alike. And he's speaking in a very philosophical way, but he ends it in a very, very similar way as Ecclesiastes 12 and saying, you build your house by obeying the commands. Yeah. And I do think there's something about sort of the way that the image that I have in my mind, again, agrarian, my goodness, but it is an ecosystem.
Yeah.
It creates an ecosystem where certain things tend to flourish and certain things tend to die, but it's not as simple as I plant one day and it grows the next. And so I think for me, it has been answering those perplexing questions when you see the person who's faithful and they're still single and they don't know why, or you see the person who's not faithful and they have the family everyone's always wanted. Right. And I think it's the psalmist questions where it's like, God, why do you govern the world the way that you do? And in Ecclesiastes, I think he doesn't always offer a solution, but he doesn't divorce God from it. And I think that's what's easier as we kind of develop parts of our lives where God doesn't really exist in my work or in my family or wherever I'm operating, not because I'm just this evil person who doesn't want God there. It's that I don't know how to operate in spaces where it's not a one-to-one correlation and God's still there. Whereas church can feel like a one-to-one correlation. We sing a song and God responds. We hear the word and you listen. Right. But most of life doesn't work that way. And so I think it's been so both perplexing and insightful that Jesus can walk into this world and he can be in not a one-to-one equation and still trust the Father in it. Because that's Satan's temptations to Jesus. It's always, if you're this, then this would happen. And I think it's going, if I'm God's, I can trust him to provide and protect me. But it'll be in a longer timeline than I'm honestly comfortable with. And I think that's still a tension to sit in.
That's good. Mm-hmm. What about strongest encouragements as you think back, like profound moments of learning or encouragement and edification for you?
I think as a preacher, it has just been a fresh reminder of there's nothing like God's word. Amen. Honestly, I just was telling in a training yesterday, I just was telling these young leaders, if anyone has said anything insightful, they stole it from the Bible.
That's right.
I'm just telling you right now, I have taken some Bible verse and thought about it and read someone else who's smarter on it, and I've told you it. Like that. That's literally it. And I think Ecclesiastes has been this reminder, because I've had people come up during the series and go, "Hey, this book's kind of one note. It's kind of hitting a lot of the same things." Like, more or less. But I think there's a wisdom in the scriptures that we take for granted when you're around it a lot. And I think maybe it's just being downtown with people who are very unfamiliar with the Bible, but it's been this fresh reminder for me. I'm like, if we will just do our job to exposit this text and apply it and wrestle it to the ground, it will do things that I could never do. Right. And so I think there's 1,000 different takeaways, but as a preacher, that's my takeaway. Is I'm like, I love the Bible.
Just trust the word.
Yeah, well, because every good insight I've ever had, I'm just taking something it's already said and thinking about it. And I think that has been a fresh reminder to me, because the Bible can go with people everywhere. I can't. And any particular church can't. But that can actually be hidden in your heart in a way where it can always help you. So that's honestly my biggest kind of meta encouragement from it.
Well, mine's going to be way less meta, way less meta, because especially when I say, it's just funny because I was so encouraged. When I look back, I feel like it was just a reiteration chapter after chapter of the idea that temporary, the vanity piece of it. And like there was this part of it, all throughout where you're like, this doesn't matter in a sense, but it does. It's not, it's temporary, and yet it matters. And this was all kind of coming to me when I was playing Mousetrap, the hit game Mousetrap with my kids. Because we're sitting here playing this game and my kids...
There's too many pieces to that game.
Well, don't even start.
It's a whole separate
It's a whole thing. Yeah. That's a different pod. Yeah. But we were playing this game, and my kids are immersed in this, and they care so much about who wins and who's got more cheese. Yeah. And it's who do you send to the mousetrap to get under? And you're just like, their whole world exists in this 30-minute game, and you're just sitting here thinking, this is temporary. This is not. But I just thought this is such a good picture for sometimes how I can act about my life. Like I'm getting lost in mousetrap. How silly that would be to think this is all there is. But I was telling my kids the reason mousetrap matters is because it matters how you respond to this loss. And it matters how you deal with your sister and how you interact. Like it's just a stage to see what we really believe and how we act. And it was just so encouraging to remember like that all of this is preparing us for what we're really made for and helping us learn how to act like that new kingdom that's beyond the sun. And so it was just one of those things where I'm just sitting there at Mousetrap being like, I don't want to live my life like Mousetrap is all there is.
If you invite me to go to a meeting, I'm like, is this a Mousetrap situation?
Is it Mousetrap? Are we doing this? That's right. Like,
fantastic. Okay, last one then. What unresolved tensions are you walking away with? I think sometimes people think you do like a study on a book in the Bible and then you just put a bow in it, right? And all resolves. I understand it all.
I am Ecclesiastes.
And now it's done, and now I just apply it, and it's easy, right? And yet we walk away with questions and unresolved tensions. What are the unresolved tensions that you guys feel as we say, goodbye for now, to this book that we've been so kind of immersed in over the last few months?
I think one of the biggest things for me was Ecclesiastes 6. It was kind of where I was like, oh, I feel a tension for this. And it was, I don't actually remember if it was you or Halem. So be encouraged. The word of God stood. I don't know who said it.
If I can get confused for the wisdom of Halem, then I'm a very happy person.
Yes.
I hope it's not. It's neither one of them.
Yeah, exactly.
It was Matt Blackwell.
I think it was in the announcements, and I loved it. No, but it was that idea that it's a grievous evil to not enjoy the life God has given to you and be satisfied. And that was a tension for me because I think, I'm like, oh man, I know that that's true. And yet I'm so quick to be dissatisfied or disappointed or want something about my life to be different. Yeah. And you kind of don't think about the severity or what that communicates and how, in a lot of ways, that really can localize you into what you don't have instead of this responsive posture of like, just thank you. Thank you, God. And it's for me, one of those things where I think the culmination of what isn't can sometimes be what I fixate on and feel that tension of that leads me to just not be thankful. And so I think as I was thinking about this question, I was like, that's where I feel the most tension because I know what I ought to do. I know the thankfulness I should feel. And yet I'm so fixated on how my day does not go on the regular, how I want it to go or how I want things to be different. And so that's something I'm still wrestling with. I think I'll continue to wrestle with just the discontentment that can take me away from a thankful heart.
That's good.
Yeah.
I think it's still the wrestle between Ecclesiastes and Proverbs.
Yeah.
Because they create such different pictures of the world. And I think it's sort of, does the way of God produce a better life? Yeah. And Ecclesiastes would say,
maybe. Sometimes.
Probably not,
but you should do it anyway.
And Proverbs would say, no, it absolutely does. Yeah. And I think it is the sort of the tension in all of us. There's the realist who turns into a cynic, and then there's the optimist who turns into a very naive person. And I think we all sort of adopt whichever one is most convenient in a moment. And it's really hard to be thoughtful to navigate all the different actors and data happening at any one moment. And I think it's why it's easier to think about following Jesus when you're sitting there studying. And it's harder in your moment because I'm hearing someone talk to me, we're having an interaction, and it's not just what they said, it's also what I'm thinking, how my day was, what do I feel right now, what am I nervous about? And somehow I have to take all that data, and there's demons and Satan and angels and God, and all these dynamics are happening in the same moment, and then I'm expected to be able to act in a wise way. Sure. Yeah. And I think that is the tension of the sort of, I think what the book leaves you with is a real state of dependence to go, all that's required of me is to be a faithful, happy little sheep.
Yeah.
And my shepherd will do everything else. I mean, it's been both the book, but just what's going on in the life of our church. God has been reminding me, I make no moves.
Yeah.
I don't make things happen. I don't make big seismic things happen. I've been in Jeremiah, and just the idea that like God's the one who makes kingdoms rise and fall. God's the one who exposes leaders. And God's the one who makes people come to Christ. God's the one who builds and grows. He's the one who does all of it.
Right.
And I will confuse my little faithful being a sheep, walking around in fields of green, trying my best to be faithful.
Yeah.
And I'll confuse like, oh, I thought because I said this thing, something happened. And Jesus is like, oh, it happened to work out that way.
Right.
And I'm still loved in the whole process. And so I think it's that Romans 8 idea of the culmination of all God's work in Paul's mind was, no, the only sure thing for you is you'll never be separated from the love of God. You may go through tribulation and trials and stress and persecution, and for your sake we're being killed all day long, is what Paul says. He goes, no, we're more than conquerors. And so his whole point is, the only thing I'm sure of is you will always be in the love of God.
Yeah.
Everything else, we will see. Yeah. And I think both Ecclesiastes and Proverbs makes me kind of walk away from the series going, I just want to be a happy little sheep, learns how to give and receive love from God and other people, and learn how to take naps and fall asleep like I'm supposed to, and go into valleys of shadow of death and be scared and be like, he's with me.
Yeah.
I think that is, it's complex, and it's not my job to parse it out.
Yeah.
It's my job to be faithful in any given moment.
That's so good, Tyler.
Yeah.
It's good. Good. What a note to end on.
Yeah.
And so thank you so much for your time today and across the series. Val, thanks for hosting this with me and trying an experiment with us here at the church that I think has helped some people.
I think so.
And a few thousand listeners. And I hope that it's been something that's been edifying to them. It's been very enjoyable to me to learn from you and to hear your thoughts and insights. It's been valuable. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So friends, this is the end of Chasing Shadows. I'm going to read the final verses of Ecclesiastes in a second, but just to let you know, we'd love for you to just keep reading your Bible. So don't let this be the last time you study something deeply. What comes next from the pulpit at the Austin Stone is we're going to teach through Advent. And then next year we'll spend 13 weeks or so in something called Holy Habits. So we're going to be looking at the spiritual disciplines. And then the next two book studies we have are Habakkuk and Philippians. And so if you want to read ahead and get the jump on us there, you're welcome to do that. But we hope to have some helpful resources for you in some way, shape or form as we teach through those books as well. For Advent this year, we have an Advent audio guide. So dropping right here on this channel on December 1st for 25 days of 10-minute Advent audio guides to help sync your life and interrupt your life and help you be devoted to Jesus Christ as you remember him and how he came into the world to save sinners like you and I. And we hope and pray that that will be helpful as a resource to you. Let me just read these verses to you. Solomon's conclusion at the end of it all, having looked at it all and how it doesn't all add one to one, he goes, the end of the matter, all has been heard. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. For God will bring every deed into judgment with every secret thing, whether they be good or evil. And so friends, God knows, and the best way for you to spend your life is to obey him and to love him and to serve him as long as he gives you breath. We hope to be helpful to you as you attempt to do that for the rest of your days. Thanks so much for joining us. We hope to see you at one of our 6 congregations at a Sunday service soon. God bless.